son or daughter would be there and, Mom, did you take your medication? And Mom would say, oh yeah, I definitely took my medication. Or, Dad, did you take your insulin? Nah, yes, I did. And then the lab test would come back that would not back that up. Sometimes they took way too much. They couldn't remember if they took it, so they took it again. So I designed a reusable medication chart. Never did much with it until my mom ended up having open heart surgery. And the angels were with me because I had about 45 minutes to pack and get to leave for the airport. I didn't even realize I had the medication charts at home, but somehow they were in my suitcase when I got to Florida. When she got out of the hospital, she had like 8 different medications at all kinds of times. So what we ended up doing is as I sat down and I filled out the chart, I found one of my designs didn't work at all. And the other one, I realized I had to rewrite the instructions. But that turned out to be crucial because with all the medication regimen, if she had made a mistake, it could have given her problems with her pacemaker. If she didn't take the antibiotic properly, the wound could have gotten more infected than it had been. There were a lot of ramifications. Now, we printed out a sheet to make sure that she always had a sheet with her. So whenever she went to a doctor, she took that list with her. We made sure she had a copy in her wallet. My father carries a copy in his wallet. Luckily, he's not on medication, so we don't have to worry about him yet. So it was important. I don't know how many of you are on medications, and I really don't want to know, but make sure you have copies. List what the medications are, what the dosages are. Keep it in your purse or your wallet. If something happens, that will help the doctors treat you. It will help the paramedics if they have to come, or if you end up in an emergency room. Because one, the medications will clue them in on existing conditions, but it also keeps you duplicating things. And they also ask better questions when they know that they've got this information to work from. Unfortunately, our medical histories don't follow us the way the system wants it to. So this is like taking control and empowering you by having that information on you. Now, the outcome after the surgery, in Rapplewood, my mom's doing great. We're 2 years down the road. About a month after I came home, I get this panicky phone call from my dad. He says, you know, if I have to call 911, I don't know anything. Your mother keeps all the information. And being the wiseacre I am, I said, yeah, Dad, we just let you think you're king. You know who rules the roost. Well, he says, my problem is what if I forget something important with everything that's going on with your mom? I said, okay, fine, I'll fix it. I put together, being in the medical field, being exposed to a lot of the questions in the emergency room, I put together a packet. I gave my mother a list of things I wanted her to put in it. And then I realized a very important thing. The paramedics aren't going to go through all that paperwork to find out what they need. Things like your allergies, things like your medication, existing conditions. My mom has a pacemaker now. She's also diabetic. These are things that could affect, if they call 911, depending upon what the situation was, would affect how they would treat her. So I wanted something that paramedics had what they needed on the spot, but if they had to go to the hospital, all my father needed was a social security number because all the paperwork was together. There would be a healthcare proxy designating that he could speak for her. I'm the alternative, and I'm unfortunately far away, but I am the alternative. And I have a copy. That's another thing we'll talk about. So I went online and I started looking for something that covered both bases. I wanted an all-in-one solution, and I couldn't find it. So I sat down and I created it. And I'm going to pass this around. There's a very comprehensive medical form in here, which is based on what the emergency room would want to know, what EMS would want to know, and I've had it looked at by paramedic coordinators, and emergency room physicians. And this is the form, and I'll pass it around afterwards. And this is the envelope. And what I did with the envelope, it's magnetic, it goes on the refrigerator, but it's got a front pocket. This front pocket is for this form, for the paramedics. And also if there's a DNR. In situations, the paramedics, if they're called, have to treat you. But Massachusetts has recently instituted something called a comfort and care DNR, do not resuscitate form. And that would go in this pocket too. Then in this upper pocket, you put copies of your insurance card. You put a photograph. You put a health care proxy, your living will, your directions as to what you want done. You put in a form stating who can get what we call a HIPAA release, who can get a hold of your information. Something as simple as calling an insurance company for my parents without the HIPAA release. The insurance company can't tell me anything. Same thing with the hospital. They can only tell somebody that you've signed and designated to get that information. So that all went in this information. So I put together this packet, and of course I sent it down to my parents. Now, I've told my mother I'm not creating anymore because about 3 months ago, she decided to test my product again. She fell in the garage. She was putting some canned goods up, and rappeled wood, she wasn't hurt seriously. But she couldn't find anything to brace herself, to pull herself up. So my dad wasn't home.
Yeah.
She wiggled over to the wall, and she just was sitting there against the wall. So when he put the garage door up, he sees her sitting there. So before he's out of the car, he's called 911. Because he has no idea what happened, but he knows it's not usual for my mother to be sitting there looking at me. So they came, and they were fabulous. One paramedic, my father went and he grabbed the thing off the thing, pulled the form out, handed it to the paramedic, and the paramedic says no. He says, I'll talk to her, she's coherent. If she were disoriented or unconscious, then we would need this. But since she's awake and is talking, now I can test her faculties to make sure that she hasn't hurt her head, things like that. Meanwhile, the other paramedic had taken it out of my father's hand, and he was just skimming it. And he noticed that she was on Coumadin. The first paramedic wasn't going to take her to the hospital. And as they were talking about the medications, the other paramedic said, she's on Coumadin. They took her to the hospital because Coumadin is a blood thinner. And when your bruises look far worse than they normally would, but also you can have internal bleeding, and that's what their concern was. So I've told my mother I'm not creating because she keeps testing my products, and that's not good. So this is what I've created. There's some interesting things that I have with this. A wallet card, which is basically a little summary of this form, and this has contact information, your physicians, your family, your insurance information you want to put on it. It talks whether you have a healthcare proxy or a living will and things like that, whether you're an organ donor. But it also, down here, this bottom part is what the paramedics need on the spot. If you're diabetic, if you have glasses, if you've got dentures, hearing aids, these are things that we don't think about because they're normal parts of life. But these are things that help them treat you. And when you get treated on the spot with the right information and the right knowledge, it can actually make if you have to go to the hospital, it can make your stay shorter because you got the proper treatment in the beginning because they're aware of the situation. So I'm going to pass these around. And if you look at the back of this Life Decisions brochure, and I have to tell you, one of the pages in here talks about organ and tissue donations. There's a lot of myths about it. And part of my first 15 years of my lab experience, I was a blood banker. And I used to go around speaking about the importance of donating blood and so forth. But there's just some questions here. But the other page talks about healthcare directives and proxies and explains a little bit about it and gives you some websites that you can look at if you have access to a computer. And on the back of this, there is a list of all the documents you should have in your own emergency kit. You can make your own if you want. You can buy one with the special envelope that we have, and that's what the other brochure for. But this basically tells you the information that you should really have available. One, it makes it easier. God forbid there's an emergency. But it also makes it easier if you end up in a hospital. When I showed this to registration at the hospital where I work, the comment was, this would make my life so much easier. I would know how to spell things correctly. I wouldn't have to ask a million questions. This is great. That was the comment. And my mother actually validated that when she fell and they had to take her to make sure she didn't have the internal bleeding. She said it was the easiest admission she had ever had. And I have to say, this is one time I'm very glad, because that was my purpose.